Hello to everyone. Hello, Dave.
Hello, everyone.
I hope we are live and everything is okay and you can hear us. I would appreciate some thumbs up just to know that technically we're okay and we can move on with our discussion today. My name is Natalia Bejan. For 3 months now, I've been the executive director at the Foundation Startup Moldova, which is an organization that is trying to enable the ecosystem of technological startups in Moldova. We're trying to boost the community, to provide support to the existing startups, and to give the idea of the fact that a future founder can maybe one day come up with a startup on their own in the Republic of Moldova. And today with me, there is Dave Peery, an investor and mentor and advisor to startups who is from the US, United States of America. So hi, Dave, once again.
Well, it's morning here, so good morning, everyone. I know it's in the evening in Moldova, but thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to a great discussion today.
Yeah, very, very honestly, not going by the script, I'm also very excited to talk to you because we've actually had already at least one discussion through the video, but I felt like I cannot really ask you too many questions because when there is a discussion, it's like 50-50. You have to make your own presentation, but then you can ask just a couple of questions. So today I'm going to use the excuse that I'm asking for the community, and I'm going to bombard you with this many questions regarding investment. So you as an investor into startups. And as I was telling you just a little earlier, since I've gotten to my position, I've been contacted by more potential investors and people interested to invest in Moldovan startups than founders of startups themselves or people who are thinking about funding a startup. And most of the people that I've talked to that are founders of startups have been complaining that there is no money and there are no investors. So this is a bit of a puzzle, like a weird situation for myself. So I want to ask you, what do you feel that is the actual situations? Are there more investors or more startups that are not able to find investors? What is the situation on the market?
Well, I think there are problems on both sides, but quite honestly, I feel like that there's probably more startups than there are investment dollars to be spread around, which is the way it should be. Yeah, because the dirty truth is most startups aren't successful. They fail at some point along the way for whatever reason. There's so many different reasons that a startup might fail. And so from an investor standpoint, they want to see as many potential successful startups as they possibly can. So they like taking a look at as many as possible, as early as possible, because then they can influence the startup themselves. Plus, they look at it as the earlier that they get involved, the lower the cost.
Yeah.
Right? So if you come into a startup after they've already been discovered, then the cost is much higher, and consequently the returns to the investor are a lot lower.
Yeah.
So investors, I mean, they have a lot of people, they have deal flow, they have people that are out searching for opportunities to take a look at interesting companies that have interesting technology for a marketplace that they feel may be very valuable. And so I'm not surprised at all that you're getting that sort of a feedback. But I also understand the other side of the story from the startup's perspective. It feels oftentimes that nobody wants to invest in me. And so that means you probably need to start thinking about yourself rather than about the investors.
Yeah. If you can tell us in a couple of minutes, what is your background? So if you'd have to make a small pitch
Sure.
of if I can call it like that. What is your background? What are you bringing on the table? So because I know you have a lot of experience.
Well, that's one of the advantages that comes with getting older is your experience keeps building. And so I go back, I was actually very, very fortunate. I was in the U.S. Air Force out of school, and I learned telecommunications and cryptography back in those days. And that really develops a keen interest in me and technology generally, digital technology. This was at a time that computers weren't, very common. There was no internet. People were really startups in those days were really solving some of the basic science problems to do semiconductor technology and get basic circuits to work and so forth. And so the industry has evolved so many times during my career that I've been able to see these evolutions, occur on a regular basis, and consequently what's beneficial for me is now I can better recognize when there's trends that are changing, right? And so after my Air Force career, I started work with a semiconductor company here in Texas Instruments. And so it was, we were doing a lot of market development for all sorts of new technologies that were coming out of our laboratories. And that made me very aware of the nature of trying to find a good product market fit. Because oftentimes the engineers would come up with what they felt like was a great idea, but we just could not find a marketplace that was a big enough, a strong enough marketplace to bring that product to market. And in other cases, things that you would just normally think would be just not so interesting, there would be a big market acceptance. So for me, it was how do I take this, what seems like an art, and try to convert it into a science? So there's some predictability in what makes a successful startup versus a unsuccessful startup. So I did that. I was with Texas Instruments for nearly 20 years. And by luck, our division got sold. And so it was an opportunity for me to reevaluate careers. And so that's when I by happenstance, became working for a startup. My very first startup was a company in Seattle. I relocated my family there, and it was during the first, web build out, just after the internet had really been offered to the world. And so this was in 1998. And so we were developing products that would allow people to build out and remotely manage data centers. And it was the perfect technology for the perfect time period. The trend was happening at the same time the technology became available. And so it was a very successful startup. I was there for 10 years. The company ultimately was sold to Emerson Electric, and it was very successful. And so since that time, now I've done several other startups, as both a founder as well as an investor, as well as just an advisor, friend of the company. And I still do a lot of mentorship. We have a accelerator program here in Austin called Capital Factory that I'm very actively involved with as well. And so at this stage of my career, I'm really looking to help other startups, other founders become successful with their companies.
Super. Dave, tell me please, how did you end up to Moldova? How did it happen? Like, why would an American investor, how did it happen? Because I want to take this as well as an example, what kind of activities, what kind of events, conferences, what type of, what needs to be done to attract people like you to come here?
Sure. Well, as most things happen by accident, Natalia, and so it's just being very visible, very active in things. And so what brought me to Moldova was a previous trip that I had made to Poland, and I was invited by the U.S. State Department to go to Poland for a week and travel around different cities in Poland and work with the startups there to do coaching sessions, workshops, and so forth. And while I was in Poland, I met a lot of entrepreneurs and startup founders and NGO participants that I became, close friends with. And so just after my trip to Poland, I was called by one, and she had been invited to go to Moldova for TechWill's Startup Week. And she said, I would love for you to come along as well. And so the next thing you know, I had to look at a map, quite honestly, to find out where Moldova was. I wasn't quite sure.
I love those kind of trips where you have to look it up on the map.
Yeah. So it was a short trip I was in, but I was just amazed. I loved the startup community there. The people there were just so warm and friendly. And I had an absolutely fabulous time. I met a lot of startups, and still have many friends in Moldova. So it was these things that you can't predict that define where you go in life.
Mm-hmm. So one lesson learned that I'm now trying to look from the other side, like from the startup side. Basically, you have to try to be at all the possible events, because you never know at which event, which connection, which person might lead you to an acquaintance that can turn to be either a partner or an investor or an important teammate.
That is very important. But I would say to go beyond that, to be active as well. Mm-hmm. Don't go to the conference and just take notes and listen to the stories. Try to engage with as many people as you possibly can. Find out what they're doing. Share your story with them and find out what they've learned, because these stories that we can share with each other really help mold us, and prepare us for the life. I mean, being an entrepreneur is certainly not an easy. It's a roller coaster. It's always ups and downs. And so having that network of other people that can later be a connection point for you, or to be a support point for you, or to just, you never know when you get an opportunity where you might recall that I met this person, that they had these skill sets and I need to get a hold of them again. Or I met somebody that sometimes invests in companies, and maybe they can give me some advice on how to improve my pitch deck for investors, So that community, that fabric of the community is really, really important. And I think, what distinguishes Silicon Valley is that it was a startup community. It was these first generation entrepreneurs that then later opened themselves up to that second tier, and then consequently it continues on. Yeah. And so, I saw that same thing happening in Moldova, and it takes a while to develop, but I think the world has gotten to be a much smaller place now. And so I would say, reach out to people that can be of value to you. So actively go to the events, but there's no problem at all connected with people that you may have some need for, that you can help, and just connect with them on LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever. Just say, I have a question for you. Not everything has to be a pitch, right? Sometimes that becomes somewhat inauthentic, but if you just approach people and say, hey, I just need a few moments of your time, I got a few questions, and maybe share those questions. Most entrepreneurs I know, or investors that I know, are more than happy to share their information with startups very freely.
Yeah, this is also what I've been experiencing so far. People are so often open. Like people with experience, experts, mentors, or people who have already achieved some great success in some way. It doesn't have to be like, I don't know, millionaires. It can be just a very, very good specialist who implemented a very nice, interesting, innovative product. Sure. Most of the time, those people are very open to share their experience with the condition, under the condition that you are not asking of them like a week of their time or a full day of their time, because usually those people, like, you need to be appreciative as well of their time. And I've heard many very rich people saying, like, if you would ask me for 5 minutes of my time, but you would tell me exactly, like, I don't know, I want to do a podcast, for example. I'm just like now speaking like just an example. I want to do a 5-minute podcast with the most inspiring people, then maybe the most inspiring people wouldn't say no, because it's just 5 minutes of their time. And if you are explaining why do you need that, what is going to be the exposure, who is going to be impacted, then they are absolutely, or like most of them will be open to share their experience.
Sure, yeah. Well, a successful startup founder has to be many things, including a salesperson. And the first obstacle you have to overcome to be successful is in your own head.
Mm-hmm.
You have to get beyond where you think your limitations are, right? And if you can look at somebody and say, oh, she would never return my call, I would be too embarrassed to reach out to them, then you've already failed. You've got to put yourself out there, because failure is necessary to have success. You have to have failure. So you have to be open to that. You have to be accepting of that. One of the things that I did notice when I traveled around the world is some societies look at failure really negatively. They label someone as, oh, that person failed in their startup, and so they're not successful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you go to places where the startup community is very, very robust, failure is actually embraced, because you learn more from your failures than you ever learn from your successes. Believe me. I mean, those lessons that you learn are very, entrenched in your psyche, because they were very painful when you learned them.
Yeah, and especially the people who overcame the failures and they took them as a lesson, and they are moving forward, striving still for improvement, for getting better, for not getting broken by one failure, but believing that another idea, another startup, another team, or another country where this might work.
Absolutely.
I see that as well. The first questions are coming up. I still have that I want to discuss, but I want to first get to a bit of history, and specifically to XOR. So XOR is a Moldovan, or like Moldovan startup. It's not based only in Moldova, but it was initiated as well in Moldova. One of the co-founders is based here mostly, Nikolay Manolov, and he is actually one of the board members in the Startup Moldova Foundation. XOR, I'll just say a couple of words for those who are listening now and who don't know. This is an HR tech startup, and this is one of the companies that Dave met. You probably met them at the Tech World Startup Week that you said.
Absolutely. Yes.
So tell me those moments. Do you remember when you met Nikolay for the first time?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you know Nikolay, he's hard to miss. He's a big, tall guy.
You're gonna miss him, yeah.
And he's very funny. And when I got finished speaking, the very first person that was waiting for me was Nikolay.
Oh, that's already a good point. Like, that's already a good lesson to take for those who are listening. That's the active part, the engaging part that you've been talking about. Mm-hmm.
He was right there, and he shared with me the success that they'd had with their startup, and he's got many other accomplishments. One of which, he'd been to more U.S. states. There's 50 U.S. states, as you may know. He's been to more than I've been. Right? He travels extensively, and so when you're thinking about, I don't know, maybe there were 100 startups there. Who am I going to remember after that? It's Nikolay. He's telling me about his company, and he's telling me about it in a way that's of interest to me. He's not sharing with me how the technology works. I don't really care about that, and most people don't. And this is one of the things that I see often with technology-based startups, is they think more about the technology, when the technology is not the important thing. The important thing is the customer's problem, And Nikolay shared with me the challenge that companies were having recruiting, and how they could use automation to be able to recruit faster and more efficiently. And then he shared with me another thing that's always important for investors is, what traction have you achieved? And they already had lots of customers, or at least a number of customers in Eastern Europe and in Russia, And so their challenge was pretty well defined. We need customers in the United States. We need investment in the United States. And so I became interested in doing that. And again, it took time to develop. There was a visit, that they paid over to the U.S. We talked about, the plan. I wasn't the perfect investor for them. I had no background in HR. I didn't, really understand that space very well. So it was a learning experience on both parts, right? And that's probably another point that I would make, is the people that come in and out of a life of a startup are there for, usually for a particular purpose. People are good at different stages of development.
Mm-hmm.
And so You know, when you meet people, you try to understand where their strengths can be applied, and you use them and you augment that. And that's what Nikolay did very well with Zora.
Mm-hmm. Super. And how long did it take from the moment when you met him until the moment that you were persuaded that you want to invest into the company? I just want to give a feeling that this doesn't happen overnight. That it
No,
takes.
it was several months, probably I would say 3 months, and that was pretty quickly, right? Oftentimes it can go much longer
Mm-hmm.
because every investor is looking for different things, right? And they have the timing has to be good. Even if they love you, they love their company, they love the market, it may not be the right time for them to make a new investment because their fund, you know, may be closing out. They may be raising new money. They may be fully invested right now. They're waiting for, you know, some investments to you know, pay back before they can make new ones. They may be overloaded in AR, VR, and you know, they just can't add to that. So there's lots of reasons, good reasons that people may not invest. And that's why you can't take it negatively. You can't feel bad because someone didn't invest in your company. Mm-hmm. Just look at that as an opportunity, gave you a chance to improve your pitch, to talk about it. You know someone else. Maybe that same person will come back a year from now or 2 years from now and be able to make a critical introduction for you. So sure. Make sure you maintain, you know, when you meet people, you do it so authentically, you create a relationship with them. And it's not a transaction, you know, it's not, well, you didn't invest, so I'm going to forget you. No, you keep these people in mind because maybe your next startup or maybe later in this startup that the timing would be right.
Yeah. And I think what I've also noticed is that basically with all of the people with investors background or that are doing investment as well, we have to remember that they are still human beings, and a human touch is absolutely needed for any relationship and for us to trust each other mutually. Like, you cannot just take it as numbers. I prepare my Excel sheets with the development of the business that I'm expecting, and then I'm just going to show 3 numbers to the person who is a potential investor, and then that's going to persuade that person to invest into me. What I've also seen is that people are trying to find mutual contacts, people that I know, that, you know, we've been to, like, as you were saying, to how many states in the US you've been. I was discussing last week with an investor from Singapore who contacted me because he saw me in the list of attendees at the Estonian pitch battle online. Just because I was from Moldova, he contacted me. He said, hey, if you have any interesting startups in Moldova, let me know. And by the way, my father is from Moldova. He's been relocated to Singapore already for a long time, but I'm thinking about going to Moldova one day. And to me, it was just so interesting that there is still the human touch that is so important. So now I'm going to remember this person as the potential investor who has a father who was born in Moldova. So this is really important.
It's a very small world that we live in.
Yeah, true. Also, what I wanted to say is regarding the XOR example of investment. You came to Moldova, so that was like half of the work, or like the chance that happened. But also the reality is that Nikolay as well traveled to the US. Yes. So from his side, so it didn't happen just like you came here, he persuaded you, and then 3 months later or 4 months later you invested. No. He also did his part of work and his investment, because as far as I know, he paid for himself for that trip. And he basically did the job of going, meeting in US with other investors as well, and with you. And then this worked out. So
yeah, it was even beyond that. It was that you know, a U.S. investor probably is not going to be interested in investing in a Moldovan company that's focused on the Moldovan market. They can't add any value to that whatsoever. But if you said, okay, this is a company that's proven some technology, they've got some traction there, maybe this would work. This idea would work in the United States, right? So then there's certain things that have to happen. You have to go try to sell in the U.S. You have to understand what are the differences there. You have to, you know, make your pitch to customers. You have to try to close some deals. And so that's what Nikolay was doing, that they came over to close some customers in the US. And I said, hey, I'd like to go along. Maybe we can help. Maybe I can try to see, through using some of my contacts, whether we can develop some interest in this product. And so it developed just like that. And then also, before most U.S. investors would be interested in investing in any foreign company, not just in Moldova, they need to have a U.S. entity. Nobody really feels that comfortable about sending their money offshore to be invested in some entity where they don't understand the legal structure, or they don't understand, how the financial system works, even the monetary. So they'd like a U.S. company that's investable, that's got traction, that's got a product, that's looking to, you can keep your development team absolutely in Moldova. It's a great place to be there, but you need people in the U.S. that are there to develop the U.S. marketplace.
That's absolutely true. And I think many people forget what is let's say, not the technical definition, not the theoretical definition, but what is supposed to be a startup. A startup is supposed to look into foreign markets. So it's not only about the US, it's about any other market. Moldova has only between 2.5 and 3 million citizens. So we cannot really call this as a sufficient playground for a business idea to become a scalable startup, because usually when we're speaking in terms of startups, we're speaking in terms of companies that at some point in time, maybe fingers crossed, they can become a unicorn, which means valued above $1 billion. And $1 billion, if you make a calculation for 2.5 million people in Moldova, that's really just not a realistic thing that you can achieve. So that's why I think it's absolutely okay to start from here, to test it here, to try to validate the product from the technical perspective.
Absolutely.
But when it comes to validation with the customers, it already requires to try different markets and going beyond the borders of Moldova.
Yeah, in fact, you can actually make an advantage out of that, Natalia, because actually, truthfully, many U.S. companies, U.S. startups are kind of lazy. They're already in a big market, so they don't often think about the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm.
They just think about, I'll just be successful here.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but the world is a big place, and so if your company has already shown that it can be successful in a number of countries on a global aspect, that's really an advantage over a lot of U.S. companies as well. So when you're a startup founder, always try to use every advantage that comes your way, even if it's a small one.
Yeah. This is funny because when I was working in China for a tech startup there, fintech startup there, they had exactly the same opinion, like mirrored opinion, that China is a sufficient market for us already. So if you can make it here, that's fine. That's sufficient. So yeah, if you have a big market, then you can probably afford saying that or thinking that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I want to proceed to two questions that are coming from Dan and Alex Danilescu. I actually know the guys. They are brothers, first of all, and second of all, they are co-founders of an ed tech startup they are working on. I actually opened in parallel my phone to read the short pitch description of their startup, just to give you a background, because their questions are mostly related to the area of their startup. They have a next generation university based on crypto ed tech on a Web3 platform. So I'm not going to give you more details now. It's not that much about their startup, but this is what they are working on. So they are trying to promote a lot in Moldova, even the cryptocurrency ideas, the Web3 platform. They are organizing a course in a couple of weeks at the Technical University in Moldova. And they're also trying to educate our people on what is NFT and why should we be looking into that direction. So one of the questions is from Dan. Hi, Dave. At what point of the development founders should search for investments? If you can elaborate on this, like when do you think a startup is ready to start looking for an investment?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm glad they asked it the way they did. I think it's not really related to the development process. I think it has related to kind of that, what's the next barrier to overcome? So if you think about any sort of startup that's going to be successful, it's got to go through a whole series of obstacles. And so the investment ought to be tied to which obstacle are you overcoming. So maybe in the early days, before any traction, you just need some development dollars to get, some beta product, or an MVP done. Then you're looking at really angel investors, friends and family are about the only way that you can do that, right? But once you got that, and maybe you've got a few users, now you're looking for funding to go achieve a certain penetration, with a certain type of customer. What you're trying to do is tie your investment with meeting objectives. They show you that you're on a path to success. And so I would say generally try to invest or try to raise as little money as possible, right? Because if you think about it, your company, if you're successful, will only get more valuable. So in the early days, you're selling your equity very cheaply, right? And so I hate to see investors raise money too early, and then when it comes time, to harvest what you've created, they don't have much equity in the company left. They've given it all away early on. And to me, that's a tragedy. The other thing that investors or that companies do sometimes is they raise money too early and then they spend it foolishly, right? When you've been without money for a long time and now you've got $1 million in the bank, as an example, it makes you think that you can do everything in the world and you become less focused on, being conservative with your funding. And so, so there's times my answer to the brothers is you can raise money along the way, but try to be very judicious about doing that. Start raising it before you really need it, right? Because when you need it, it's too late because it just takes too much time. It takes months, typically, at least, in order to raise any amount of money. But be careful and tie it to what you need. If it's for development, then build it around just the development. Another one is now I've got something that's repeatable. I've been able to sell it successfully. Now I need to see if it's going to, be successful in the U.S. So I need to hire some salespeople, or I need to set up a new structure there, and I need this much money to do that. And investors will love that approach because too often investors just come in and invest in us and we're going to be rich. And there's like, no, I need to see milestones along the way. So tie your investment request along with specific milestone achievements.
I think that's a great advice. Before I go to the next question, I just want to ask you something in line with this, with the previous question. How much, if I can be really honest in the way how I'll formulate my question, how much of a pain in the ass can be the investors? Because there are so many startups that are so eager as soon as possible to get the investors on board. But there is the other side of the reality. And this is actually part of my experience as well. I've been sharing it with the guys as well. The last startup that I've been working in the Czech Republic, we really had a different point of view, part of the management team with the investors who got 100% of the company. So they negotiated the company in such a way that they basically bought the entire company. We really had a different perspective on how the company should be developing. And especially me being in the position of the chief customer officer. So I was responsible for everything what means customer satisfaction, processes for the customers, NPS of the customer. So at some point, the investors turned in their interest into profitability of the company and making it profitable as soon as possible. So at that point, basically the control of the company was completely lost, because you can be a manager, you can be a top manager or C-level manager in the company, but you're not the investor. So you're not the final ultimate decision maker. Even though they will not be participating at the management meetings, it's still their strategy that needs to be implemented. So how much of a problematic, guide or can be the investor?
Well, again, that's why the process should take longer than most startups want it too, right? They just want the money, you know, but there's something else that comes with the money, and that's the opinion. Now you've got a new stakeholder involved in your company, and they've got their own ideas about things. So you got to take that time. It's just like you're getting married, right? You need to make sure that you're compatible with the person that you're marrying it, because you're going to have a long journey together, right? And or it may be a very painful journey. In either case, you need people that have the same sense of values that you do, that want to achieve. They want you to be successful. You know, if you're only wanting the investors' money so you can be successful, and the investors only wanting, you know, to invest in you so that they can make money, then it's not going to be a very successful relationship. So it's, you know, the entrepreneur, the founder, needs to think about this investor's getting in my car to drive with me on this long journey. You know, I want this to be a great ride for them. I want them to make a lot of money. I want them to be successful in that, right? Because if they're successful, that means I'm successful too. Yeah. And it's more of an attitudinal thing that you have. You know, unfortunately, you know, things like Shark Tank on television, you know, they give the appearance that it's all about raising the money.
Right. Yeah.
And it's all about a pitch that you can do. You know, where you're going to come in and you're going to wow somebody with your pitch, and then you're going to walk away with the check. And that's really distorted reality. That's not the way it works. That's not the way it should work, right? That's just television, right?
Now you probably like broke so many images in the head of people, like, oh my God, what do you mean? No, but we're watching this Shark Tank and we're believing that. That's how we're getting ready for the pitches. I'll take the next question from Alex. Hello, Dave. How do you think, what impact Web3 will have on startup investments? So I know the Web3 is it's a rather new thing coming up right now. I know the guys are building their platform on Web3. What do you think? Is this a buzz thing? Is this somehow something interesting that the investors are looking for in some way?
Well, yes, I think Web3 will be something, you know, I think it will be something big, but it won't happen as fast as, you know, most entrepreneurs that are developing Web3 applications will want it to, right? Things usually don't happen nearly as fast as the most optimistic, but they usually happen faster than most pessimistic. It's always usually somewhere in the middle. And, you know, there's some famous, you know, charts about how new technologies develop, right? And they go through this hype cycle. You probably heard of that, right? And Web3 is at the top of the hype cycle right now. Everybody's talking about it, everybody's enthusiastic about it, you know, but it takes a while for those technologies to fully be integrated and put into useful purposes and for adoption to occur. And that's why there's almost always this period where there's just, you know, a lot of failures that happen. There's a lot of diminished, you know, opinions. People get very negative about it. And so, you know, part of the issue is that, you know, tying things, you know, the blockchain, peer-to-peer kind of communications, things like that, to useful sorts of applications. Again, I'll reiterate it. Investors, customers don't buy technology. They buy solutions to problems, right? Investors don't invest in technology. They invest in companies that can solve problems and make money. So the technology itself is just a means to an end. It's not the end in itself. So think beyond just what the technology is and think about what this is going to enable. And usually that's when the technology begins to take off. And this is someone that was working on artificial intelligence in the 1980s. And we thought it was going to take over the world. Well, it is now, but it took 30 years, you know, for AI to fully develop and become embraced and find the right ways, you know, that it can be embodied in products that are useful to humans, you know, and it unfortunately takes a lot more time than most people want to admit.
Super.
Keep working at it though. I mean, it's just, but again, stay focused on the problem. You know, what are we going to solve that's meaningful to people?
Yeah, that's a great advice. That's a great advice. I think sometimes we forget that thing. We so much focus on the business requirements, technical requirements, bugs to solve, that we just forget that the reason why the app, the platform is being constructed is, as you were saying, is not because of the technical solution, but it's because of the solution that it provides to the
Oh,
customer.
absolutely. Yeah,
That's amazing.
absolutely.
You've mentioned the age of the ideas, how it might take 30 years, for example, for an idea or for, I don't know, a concept to actually materialize. What do you think about the age of the founders, co-founders? And I'm actually asking this from a very real, actual situation here in Moldova. I know one of the startups who don't even want to call themselves a startup, even though they have absolutely all of the ingredients needed for a startup. But the founder is a man who is approaching 60 years old, and he is actually the mastermind behind everything. He is the soul of everything. But he doesn't feel comfortable calling himself a startupper because he says that he doesn't fit into the definition, into the
Sure.
description who is the founder of a startup. Do you meet startup founders who are of not of 30, not of 20 years old, but of 40 or 50 years old? Do you see any difference in age? Is this a myth or
Sure.
is this reality?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentor startup groups at the University of Texas here, and these are undergraduate students. And that, every year when I do this, they come up with these ideas, and they're very enthusiastic, and they all think that they're going to make millions of dollars off of these. And the whole purpose, they don't realize it at the time, but the purpose is to allow them to experience some of these failures, right? Because that experience then will mold them for the next time or the one after that. And occasionally you'll find one that was very, very lucky. They had a great idea at the right time and it was successful, right? But you find people in the later years and they've got experience and they understand where things are broken. My thought on just entrepreneurship in general are find things that are broken in our society and go fix them, right? You'll make a lot of money, right? And it doesn't matter whether you use technology or just people, it doesn't matter how you solve it. But if you're solving problems that have, caused society problems for many years, then you will make a lot of money there. And so there's some advantage, I think, to having some age, some experience where you know things that just don't work very well. But if you're so far advanced that you know they don't work well, but you just accepted them, then maybe it's not time to do a startup, because startups require lots of energy. They travel long nights, things like that. And so you can find some very energetic people in their 60s and 70s that would be great at a startup, right? But for the most part, 20s, 30s is a great age to do it. They say the most successful startups probably happen with people in their 40s, right? That started or they're at least involved with it, maybe the 50s, but it's a curve for sure, right? But it can happen at any time. This last class, I'm working now with a robotics company here in Austin, and so there was one of the students in this last class for the University of Texas that they just turned 18. They had to wait a few months to file their patent because they weren't 18 yet, right? And he's got a patent on a robot that pulls people or finds people in burning buildings and pulls them out. And it's like, wow, how do you do that at 18? So this kid's a genius, right? But so he may very well be successful. And I've seen others that are more mature people, both men and women, that have seen something that's caused them some issues. They've been concerned about this for a while, and now they've dedicated themselves. I'm going to go fix this problem. Now they may not be the developer, but they're the person that can bring this idea to fruition and bring it to marketplace. And I would bet 100% on that. So don't ever let your age be a limitation to you. I don't care if you're really young or really old. Your age is not a factor, really. If you got the energy, you got the idea, you got the skills, you got the commitment, go for it.
Super. One more question that I want to ask, but you've elaborated already a bit on it. Still, I want to re-emphasize this because, as you were saying, like more than 90% of startup ideas will eventually fail. They will not. They will burn out either because the idea wasn't okay, or the team didn't have the energy, or something just happened and didn't work out. Do you see this failure as an asset? And do you think startuppers, co-founders should speak more about their experiences from what didn't work and now they are working on this something new? Or because I've seen many people who are trying to hide basically the years from their
Right.
their resumes where they've been working on something and it just didn't work.
Well, I think first of all, you have to be very truthful to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You have to, after a failure, you have to examine why did it fail,
Mm-hmm.
right? And oftentimes where, there may be a negative opinion if somebody says, oh, don't do that. I tried that a long time ago and it failed. And you try to discourage someone else from trying to solve this problem. That's the wrong way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
What you have to do is say, what made it fail? Was the technology too early? Was it too late? Did I execute it really poorly? What made it fail? And then that way you can commit yourself to solving it the right way. It's correcting that. You have to understand that root cause there. But just because something was failed is like, how do you, what lesson did you take out of it? And that's one of the very first things that I want to know when I meet people, whether I'm looking to partner with them, invest in them, or just coach them or mentor them. I want to understand, what's your philosophy on life? Do you take failure and keep it internal and just, where it causes you, issues, where you can't sleep, you can't dream, you can't get beyond that. I've seen, one of the things that I hear a lot is don't ever give up. Don't ever give up, as a founder. Well, where did you hear that advice? You heard that from the people that ultimately were successful, and they shared that advice. But below those people are hundreds of people that failed and they should have stopped. It was a bad idea. They've destroyed their family. They've destroyed their life. They've destroyed their will. Maybe it's destroyed them as people, right? And so you always have to be taking an objective evaluation of where am I at on this road.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm going the wrong way, I can keep pushing, forward, but I'm going to end up in a way low place from where success is. You have to be honest with yourself as an entrepreneur, and that's brutal sometimes. We don't like to acknowledge our failures in life. Mm-hmm. But if you don't, then you go find a place where you can get a paycheck, and you don't have to worry about that sort of thing, right? There's no reason for you to be miserable the rest of your life for chasing something that you're not really set up for. But if you can be honest with yourself and accept your failures to the point you can talk to them openly and embrace them, then you've got an opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Super. I just like it so very much that you are talking from the perspective of values, because honestly speaking, I don't hear that so often from people with a lot of experience. But also is the truth that we usually don't have that much time to talk to people with a lot of experience. So usually it's to the point. Okay, tell me exactly what I need to change, what I need to do, how should I impress you. But it's so very true that we have to be truth to ourselves, and you cannot fake it if you don't believe in the idea that you are working for, or if you're not enjoying the process, because it's going to exhaust you. It's just simply
so you can fake it, but it's for the short term, not in the long term. That's exactly right.
We have just 10 more minutes left for our discussion, and I want to ask you a couple of questions regarding the process. I actually want to get into your kitchen regarding how do you look at the startups as an investor? Do you go to pitch battles? or do you receive some papers on your table that you are going through some information about the startups? How does it happen? Like, how do startups get on your table?
Well, lots of ways. So I'm pretty active in all the things that I mentioned before. So I do a lot with the startup community, particularly here in Austin, and a few other networks. I honestly don't do that simply looking for investment. And unless you're a venture capitalist, where that's your business, then most people are there because these are the things that interest me. I get energy from my life out of working with other people, helping young people. You know, I mentioned sometimes that the reason I like to mentor young people now is because my own son is a doctor, and I couldn't help him become a doctor, but I'm relying on other doctors to bring my son up and help them, help coach them and train them. And so I owe it to their children to help them. If they want to become an entrepreneur, then I'm there to help them. And so, you know, when you think about investing, there's more than just money. There's investing time, resources, your Rolodex, you know, making introductions for people. There's a lot of ways that a person can invest in a startup that's even outside of the money aspect of it. So in all honesty, I'm not really looking for investments and keeping track of them on a spreadsheet and things like that. I'm there to help people. And if I see something that's really interesting, that looks like it's got a great team, we gel well, it looks like a good market, then I'm open, you know, to looking at doing, you know, an investment in that company. But if I get the sense that it's just, hey, write this check and shut up and go away, that's the thing that freezes me out immediately, right? Because, you know, there's so much more someone with some experience can offer to a startup than just a check. You know, the check is almost the smallest piece, right? It can be
how much time do you need to understand whether an idea or a person with an idea deserves more attention, at least more attention? Is it a couple of
quickly?
Is it a couple of
Because I can tell usually by just, you know, a few questions about the person, you know, what are they talking about? Are they talking about themselves and all the things they've accomplished? Or are they talking about their technology and how the technology works? Or are they talking about something that's important to them, this problem that I need to solve? It may be hunger, you know, it may be inefficiencies, it may be, you know, lots of things. But if I hear that passion about the problem they're trying to solve, then my interest goes way up, right? And then, you know, but you have to ask some really hard questions because it's easy with as many technologies. We had the question earlier about Web3. Well, if you ask 100 people, there may be one or two that can tell you what Web3 is.
Yeah.
Right. That's why it's going to take a long time to develop, right? Yeah. If you're the only person that understands it, or you're a small community of people you're in computer science class with understands what Web3 is, and can explain it. You know, one of the greatest things that one of my friends here in Austin did is he created an organization called Pitch a Kid, right? Okay. And he has 3 children, and so if you want to pitch him, basically you have to pitch the children. And they created an entire organization where entrepreneurs will go pitch these children. Oh, and if you think about it, that means you have to explain your technology in language that a child could understand. Yeah. Right. Because if you're explaining your technology in ways that your customer can't understand you've got zero chance. The second thing of value is if you're telling your story or making your pitch to somebody that's not interested in what you're doing, they're going to say, oh, okay, that's great. And they'll walk away. Children are brutally honest. They will tell you if your idea stinks, it sucks, you know, I didn't understand it, you know, you're not explaining it very well. So children are honest and they are pretty smart. And if they can understand it and appreciate it, then you've probably got something of real interest there. And so I would say that, you know, from a pitch standpoint, you know, unlike Shark Tank, where it's trying to make a a variety show on television or something like that. But make it interesting, because it's interesting from the perspective of, here's what I'm doing. This is my mission. This is how I'm going to get there. And,
Yeah.
I think I got a little off track on that, but it just recalled to me this, where do people find value?
Yeah, true. I was actually thinking about it a couple of days ago, the fact that I worked in China for 2.5 years building this startup, which was a virtual credit card. And I don't know up to this day what was the language that the programmers used for programming. I just don't know it because I never got into that detail. And I don't feel like I missed something important. And I've never used that specific detail when talking to any potential partner or customer, because that's really not important for them.
Right.
And for me, what was important is that the IT team was experienced enough, professional enough by themselves to decide which is the best platform in order to make this virtual card virtual. So it has to have an app behind, it has to work, it has to be flawless.
That's right.
But for the customer, for the partners, I don't know which language they use. Like, I have no idea.
It's just not important. And so you'd asked earlier about things that I look for, and I look for people that can focus in and ask the right questions and understand what that nature of that problem is. If you don't talk to at least 100 people and get their idea about what the problem is, don't even talk about your solution. Just understand the problem and how that problem impacts them and how much value it would be for them to solve that problem. Now you've got something that you can work with. We start with the wrong thing sometimes. Start with a problem, find a solution that fits. Because the other way is a long road.
Yeah, I just have to give here another example because it was such a painful lesson. It was the first 6 months in China. That was a complete, maybe not a complete disaster, but quite a disaster, because we believed in a product that we designed. It was 5 consultants from Europe that relocated to China to build this idea of a virtual credit card. We built it within 6 months to have a prototype for testing. And then after 6 months, we realized that the Chinese consumers are just not taking it. They are just not interested in it. So if we assumed a conversion of some 3 or 4%, it wasn't even 0.01%.
Right.
And that was the point. It was 6 months into the very, very heavy programming that we realized that we completely forgot to speak to the Chinese consumers. And then there was the next lesson learned, is that to Chinese consumers, you have to ask the questions in a specific way, because you cannot just ask open questions openly to them, because they are not going to be always brutally honest with you.
Right.
They will just try to be very nice to you, and they will just try to say, there is this interesting video about when you're trying to sell something to your mom. So you're coming up with a startup and you're trying to sell it to your mom as the first customer. Of course, the mom will buy it. Of course, she will be very, very supportive. But you cannot call that a customer validation. You have to really go through the painful process of, as you were saying, talking to 100, 200 people and actually getting their real feedback.
Yeah, and do so in a way that's honest. Again, this honesty with yourself. You need to be looking and embracing people that don't like your idea or that think it's a bad idea.
Yeah.
Right? Because they represent so many other people. If you only want to talk to people that really love your idea, then you're fooling yourself. You're really faking yourself out, and you're setting yourself up for a very difficult time.
Yeah. Dave, this was a really interesting discussion. I'll have to come up with some idea how to invite you for one more meeting discussion. I don't know, maybe someday even to meet you here in Moldova. Maybe we'll come up with something and we'll invite you here. It's amazing how much experience you have, but how much grounded you remain, and how what a real touch you have with, as you were saying, with the values, with the principles. So I really like this idea that going for a startup is not about going for the $1 billion, for big checks, for the big money, for the idea that will simply disrupt the world. It's about, what do you bring as a contribution? How much do you enjoy it? How much is it in line with your values, with the values of your family? Are you happy doing it? Are you making anyone happy doing it? So thank you very much for bringing this side of the story.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, Natalia, and I've had a great time, and I look forward to doing another one sometime in the future too.
Thank you very much.
Thanks to everyone that tuned in and listened to us today. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. Have a nice day to you and evening to us here.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.